Right, one last major question I had before I go, just because I think I'd be remiss not to ask you this, which is this, right? There's a piece of trivia which, listen, now it never happened, so for now it's just a fun thing that like could be on like a Wikipedia one day, because it just sounds so mental, which is like Thorin could actually have been the Fnatic League of Legends coach. This is a real thing that was actually like, at least it was an idea that was floated, I'll put it that way. It was never actually happened, obviously.
It's advanced, right?
Yeah, and basically this was at the end of 2014. Obviously, the team that you had instead, I will say, by the way, there's almost no way the results could have been as good. Like, without that, you won both the splits. You got the Daylor guy who became, I think, probably the best coach at the time. Obviously, went top 4 at Worlds, top 4 at MSI. Like, basically, the year couldn't almost have gone any better, you know, like it was actually better. So in reality, it's actually probably better that it didn't happen. But the reason I want to ask you is this, 2 factors. One, obviously, most people will know, like I alluded to earlier, I don't consider myself an expert in League of Legends. Like, in CSGO, I am arrogant enough to think, even though I was never a pro player, I do know better than people who are pro players. But the difference is in League of Legends, I would never claim that, right? I just think I know like general things about how teams work and competitors and that sort of jazz, right? So my question is this, right? Obviously, we've never discussed this publicly. I think fans would be interested to know why would you pick me for something like that? Because in this scenario, what I was describing about you being the CGO, etc. If someone like me joined, what if I'd fucked it up? What if I was terrible? What if like, it was the worst year ever? And then everyone's like, right, cArN, you have to actually recruit real people now, not people from Counter-Strike. Like, what was the logic behind why you even thought this was like worth it? Because it was obviously a gamble, right?
Sure. Yeah, a lot of water under the bridge since. So what is the logic I felt at that point back 7 years ago? Staying on values. Do you, Duncan, Thorin, Shields represent our values today? Well, questionable. Let's have a conversation about that. But indeed, I do think it was a seed in terms of, I mean, you're a great man, by the way. Don't get me wrong. I love your work. What I was trying to say, there was probably a bit of a seed in terms and an early attempt to maybe using an Apple catchphrase now, like think differently in a sense, right? So the stereotypical way, the traditional way, the conventional way, and maybe the expected way you as a CGO or a CEO hiring a head coach would be, well, let's find someone that is really fucking good at the game because I'm not really good at the game. But I felt I need more so someone that can kind of lead, inspire, bring in a certain way of maybe approaching things versus which is not, yeah, you have that in head coaches, right? Because the typical head coaches I'm still talking about in terms of like, yes, game know-how, this is how I draft, this is how I want my warding done, this is rotations, this is how I see about shot calling and risk taking and baron fights and whatever have you. That's all fine, but if you can only master that part, it's almost to me, I'm not convinced, I'm going to say this, but if you cannot touch both the kind of outside goal setting motivation, setting kind of a cultural code and a cultural compass, and if you can't do that, I think you're going to really struggle over time. I think a year's time is maybe very limited. And I'm not saying just a year's time because that's the kind of time capsule we talk about here, that was your opportunity to join Fnatic. It was what Daylor did, but we extended him for a year. But we started to think more like, what have we had before, what has not worked, etc. And I can't, in better words, actually describe it, but you can say that I think maybe Lewis, Daylor, in question that we went for in the end, because I think it was you saying no to us at the end, but I do, however, think, and this is not me fabricating the past, Duncan, but if there was a position where Daylor, who we went for, and you were like on the last line, like decision making, it's very likely Daylor would have been the guy, because he was very much this hybrid that I was trying to refer to a moment ago. In terms
he already had a background in coaching poker and stuff. Yeah, I mean, he was a much better candidate if people don't know, of course. Yeah.
But the point is that he was everywhere on the spectrum in the sense where he had capabilities. He saw also, it's not necessarily that you have the skill set, but he had a wider spectrum and a work ethic that I haven't seen until today, almost in terms of like just willingness to just come in. I think he spent the first month, maybe even 2 months, and that's a long time in a split, bear in mind, to just kind of analyze and think, taking notes and trying to break down into, I don't know exactly how he did it, he's a genius, but I imagine that he maybe broke it down to like, okay, we have a set of 20, let's call them core issues or core problems, but what are the underlying pattern between those? And then I start to pull those levers, and that resulted in obviously one player change prior to summer split. It resulted in one of our most successful years, but yeah, to kind of wrap up things here, I suppose, Duncan, is just like, yeah, we're reaching an era, and we were probably quite early on that. So you were involved in that regard, right? That we just didn't think like, yeah, game knowledge, game skills equals success. But you need that, but you also need this other part, which is ability to lead, to inspire, to confront, to problem solve. I mean, it's a very male-oriented business right now, the competitive side of esports. You see this in more or less every title. I think you have a few exceptions, obviously. And one of those kind of pillars that I've realized, and I realized probably around that time, is that many of these players, they need good male role models as much as they need guidance in game. They probably need more good male role models than they need help in game. Yes. Because they resolve those other pieces in terms of like, these are some of the values you should have when you become a man and becoming an adult, and how you interact with other people. And this is not to open up another kind of can of endless conversation / monologue perhaps, but the absence of today's generations of players' absence or lack of benchmark from the traditional world of sports, because they grew up with Fortnite, with League of Legends being there at a very early age. I'm just thinking, if I got access to a broadband connection at age 5 instead of age 11, if I fell in love with FPS, Quake, and eventually Counter-Strike at an earlier age, it's very likely I wouldn't have proceeded at all in football, floorball, and other sports. But I'm happy I did, because I think despite obviously those coaches you had back then was maybe a dad of one of the other players, it did something too in terms of thinking it's not that you should think in any box way in every kind of problem thing, in every problem solving you do. But there is I think it's a bit under check now, or is being more monitored and controlled. But there was a point of time when the esports business scaled, and I spoke about it a few moments ago, that I was quite lonely in terms of like team management. I was a CDO, and I was running maybe between kind of star players or team captains, sometimes coaches, meanwhile running a business on the same time. So the arrival of team managers and frankly speaking, some older staff and more adults, and having more adults in the room. But that kind of era, let's say 2013, 2017, 18, I wish right now that we have injected people that come from just traditional sports or just leadership roles, even if they know nothing about the game. Because I think Fnatic Counter-Strike would have gotten maybe another major if that would have happened. We went to Atlanta, Georgia, losing to VP in the best of 5. I think we lost 3-2. We're sitting in the hotel bar, and then shit it's not that people was drinking. We were sitting in the bar because that was in the lobby. And suddenly we make a decision that we're going to break up the team. And the team stays with Dennis and Olof. But what about we had an on-site team director with more people management skill and less game skills, for example? What would have happened then? So yeah, conclusion is, I think we fought right in terms of like approach, even back then. It didn't manifest in you joining us at that point. It went for Daylor, but it was around the time we started to set in motion something more like trying to actively confront some of those challenges. And we're getting to a better place, but the place we're also looking out from now, the vantage point of August 2021, is an extremely competitive environment. So having a few trophies, I want to have more, I want to have all of them, but the work cannot stop. That's the thing I've learned the last few years.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.